The box was wrapped in silver paper with a white ribbon, and my mother-in-law slid it across the dining table toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Go ahead," she said. "Open it. We've been waiting for this moment for a long time." I remember thinking it was odd, that phrase, "we've been waiting," because it was supposed to be my anniversary, mine and my husband's. 7 years. I had made reservations at the Italian place where we had our first date, but my father-in-law had called that morning and said the whole family wanted to celebrate together. I said yes, because I always said yes. That was the thing about me back then. I always said yes to them. There were 14 people at that table. My husband's parents, his brother and sister-in-law, cousins I barely knew, 3 of our mutual friends who had, apparently, also been invited without anyone telling me, and my best friend, Tamsin, sitting 2 seats to my left, who I'd asked to come because something had been sitting wrong in my chest all week, and I didn't know why. I pulled the ribbon loose. Inside the box was a manila envelope, the kind you get at any office supply store. My name was written on the front in my father-in-law's handwriting. Just my first name, Meredith. Not even my last name, which was, technically, still his son's last name, because we were still married, because nothing had happened yet, because I did not yet know what the next 4 minutes would do to my life. I looked up at my father-in-law. He was leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, watching me the way people watch something they have already decided the outcome of. "Open the envelope," he said. "My husband, Owen. And I want you to understand that I am using that word husband, one of the last times I will ever use it, because he stopped being that to me in the moment I am about to describe. My husband was looking at the centerpiece, a vase of white lilies his mother had arranged herself. He would not look at me. I opened the envelope. Divorce papers, filed, notarized, already signed by Owen on a date 3 weeks prior, which meant he had been carrying this around for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sleeping next to me, 3 weeks of "I love you," "good morning," 3 weeks of sitting across from me at breakfast while I talked about maybe finally redoing the kitchen. The table was completely silent. I set the papers down. I looked at my father-in-law first, then at my mother-in-law, then at my husband, who was still looking at the flowers. "Owen," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Look at me." He did, and what I saw on his face was not guilt. It was relief. The specific relief of someone who has been dreading a conversation and is glad someone else started it. "This is for the best," my father-in-law said before Owen could speak. He had always been the one who spoke for Owen. I should have paid more attention to that years ago. "We think it's time for our son to have a real chance at the life we planned for him. You've had 7 years, Meredith. 7 years and nothing to show for it." Nothing to show for it. I want to sit with that phrase for a second, because it tells you everything you need to know about my in-laws. 7 years of my life. A home I had decorated and maintained and filled with warmth. A career I had put on hold twice when we moved for Owen's job. A marriage I had believed in completely. And the reason it amounted to nothing in my father-in-law's estimation was very simple. I had not produced a grandchild. We had been trying. I want to be clear about that. We had been trying for 3 of those 7 years, and the fertility specialist had told us it was a matter of time and patience, that there was no clinical reason we couldn't conceive. But my in-laws had decided, somewhere along the way, that the problem was me, that I was the defective one, that Owen deserved better, and apparently they had spent the last several months helping Owen find it. A woman appeared at the far end of the table. She had been sitting there the whole time. I realize that now, but I had assumed she was a cousin's girlfriend or a +1 I hadn't met. She was young, maybe 24. She smiled at me in a way that was almost apologetic, or wanted to seem that way. My mother-in-law said brightly, "This is Stephanie. She and Owen have been getting to know each other. She comes from a wonderful family. She has 2 younger siblings, so we know she, and here she paused in the practiced way of someone who wants their meaning to land. We know family is important to her. So that was it. That was the audition Stephanie had passed that I had failed. She had siblings. She had, in their estimation, proven herself simply by existing in a family that had managed to reproduce. I looked around the table at our friends, at people who had come to our wedding, at a woman named Deborah who had been in my book club for 4 years and who was currently studying the tablecloth. Nobody was looking at me. Nobody had warned me. 14 people in that room, and not one of them had picked up the phone. I looked at Tamsin. She was already reaching into her purse. I had not told her to do anything. I want to make that clear. What Tamsin did in the next 30 seconds was entirely her own decision, born from 12 years of friendship and the particular kind of loyalty that doesn't need instructions. She placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of my father-in-law. I believe this is also relevant to the evening, she said. He looked at it. He looked at her. He picked it up. The room, which had already been quiet, became a different kind of quiet. The kind that happens when everyone senses that something is shifting in a direction no one planned for. I watched my father-in-law's face as he read. I had never particularly liked that face. It was the face of a man who had spent 60 years being told he was right about everything, and it showed. But I had never seen it go still the way it went, still in that moment. The color didn't drain so much as retreat, pulling back from his jaw and his forehead until he looked like a slightly deflated version of himself. He set the letter down. He didn't say anything. He actually could not, in that moment, say anything. And I had never seen that before in 7 years of knowing him. Let me back up and explain what Tamsin knew. 3 weeks earlier, the same week Owen had apparently signed those divorce papers without telling me, I had gone to my regular annual checkup and mentioned to my doctor that my cycle had been irregular. She ran a panel. She called me 2 days later. I was pregnant. 8 weeks. I had not told Owen yet. I had been trying to figure out the right moment, the right way, because our trying had been so fraught for so long that I was scared to say it, until I was sure, until I had seen the heartbeat on a screen, until it felt real enough to survive being spoken aloud. Tamsin was the only person who knew. She had been with me when I got the call. When she handed my father-in-law that envelope, it contained a copy of my blood work, the confirmation from my OB, and the ultrasound image from my appointment the week before. There was a heartbeat. There was a perfectly healthy, completely real pregnancy, and at the bottom of the page, Tamsin had typed, because she is, among her many qualities, a woman who understands the value of documentation, a single line. You have just signed away your grandchild. My father-in-law looked up at me, his mouth opened. Meredith. Don't, I said. It was the smallest word, 1 syllable, but I had never said it to him before, not once in 7 years, and the sound of it in that room was something I will remember for the rest of my life. I looked at Owen, my husband, the man I had loved since I was 28 years old, who was sitting at a table surrounded by people who had orchestrated the most public and deliberate humiliation of my life, and who had let them do it, and who had signed his name to it 3 weeks ago. I'm going to need you to understand something, I said to him. I was still steady. I don't know how. You signed those papers. You chose to do it this way, in front of all these people, on our anniversary, rather than just talking to me like a human being. So I'm going to honor that choice. But I want you to know, you will have the opportunity to be present in this child's life. Whether that happens will depend entirely on the decisions you make in the next few weeks. And it will not involve your family. Then I stood up, and I got my coat from the hook by the door, and Tamsin got her coat, and we walked out of my in-laws' house into the cold November air and got into her car. She turned the heat on. We sat there for a minute. You okay? She said. Not even slightly, I said. Drive anyway. I need to tell you about the weeks after. because people always want the story to end at the dramatic moment. But the dramatic moment is never the hard part. The hard part is the Tuesday morning 2 weeks later when you're eating cereal alone and you realize that you've been reaching for your phone to text someone about something funny that happened and then remembering that you can't, that the person you used to text is the person who let his father hand you divorce papers as an anniversary gift in front of 14 people. The hard part is the attorney's office, which, and this is something my in-laws had not thought through because they were so confident in their choreography, which became a very different conversation when we disclosed the pregnancy. Owen had signed papers, but signed papers without a court order are not a divorce, and a pregnancy changes the legal picture significantly. My attorney, a compact and unhurried woman named Beverly, who had been doing family law for 22 years, looked at everything my in-laws had arranged and was quiet for a long moment and then said, "They did this publicly? In front of witnesses?" And when I said yes, she said, "Good." I don't want to go into the legal specifics because honestly that's not the point of this story. The point is that the structure they had built so carefully, the papers, the timing, the introduction of Stephanie, the audience, all of it became, legally speaking, evidence of a pattern. Beverly used words like coordinated and premeditated when describing it to the mediator. That mattered. Owen called me a week after that dinner. He said he hadn't known I was pregnant. I believe him actually. I believe that part. I believe that he genuinely did not know, and I believe that when he found out he felt something real. Guilt, maybe, or something adjacent to it, but I also believe that if he had known, he still might have let his father run that dinner the way he ran it, because Owen had been letting his father run things for 41 years, and that doesn't stop just because the stakes get higher. It gets harder to stop, if anything. He asked if we could talk. I said yes, because the child I was carrying was going to have a father, whether I wanted that to be complicated or not, and so I needed to figure out what version of complicated was survivable. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground, a Tuesday morning. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping. Good. I hadn't either, so at least we had that. He said he was sorry. He said he had let his family push him into something he hadn't fully thought through. He said he hadn't been strong enough. He said he knew that wasn't enough. He was right that it wasn't enough. But I was also sitting across from someone who was going to be in my life for the next 18 years, whether the marriage survived or not, and so I needed to decide what I actually wanted. Separate from what I deserved. Separate from what felt satisfying. Separate from the version of the story where I walk away and everything wraps up cleanly. I didn't take him back. I want to be clear about that. I want to be clear because I've seen people read situations like mine and assume that reconciliation is the brave ending, the loving one, the one that proves you're the bigger person. I've never believed that. The brave thing is the thing that's true. And the true thing, for me, was that I did not trust Owen anymore, and I did not think that trust was recoverable. And I had a child coming who needed me to make decisions based on reality and not on what I wished were true. But I did tell him I was willing to co-parent well, and I meant it. And he has, actually, shown up for that. He comes to the appointments. He was in the room when our daughter was born. We named her June because she came in June, and because I have always thought simple names are the ones that last. He is present in the small, practical ways that matter. His family is a different story, and I have not had to interact with them, which has been possible because Owen, for the first time in his adult life, has been drawing some of his own lines. I don't know what happened with Stephanie. I know she and Owen are no longer in contact because he told me that and I believe it, and also because Tamsin has a mutual acquaintance who confirmed it. I don't spend much energy on it. What I do spend energy on is this. I have a daughter who is 7 months old and who smells like warm bread and who laughs when I blow raspberries on her stomach. I have an apartment that is mine, that I chose, that has good light in the kitchen and a porch where I drink coffee in the mornings. I have Beverly's cell number in my phone for whenever I need it. I have Tamsin, who showed up at the hospital with a duffel bag full of snacks and a printed spreadsheet of pediatricians she had already researched and ranked by patient review scores. I have a life that is smaller than the one I had planned, and larger than the one I was almost reduced to that November evening. My father-in-law has not spoken to me since the dinner. He sent one text 3 days later that said he hoped we could eventually find a way to move forward as a family. I read it once and did not respond. There's a kind of power in that silence that I never understood before, the power of a door that closes from the inside. You can knock all you want. The person on the other side has simply decided they are done answering. My mother-in-law sent a card when June was born. It had a drawing of a duck on it and a check inside. I deposited the check into June's savings account. I threw the card away. That felt like the right distribution. I think about that dinner sometimes. Late at night when I'm feeding June and the apartment is quiet, I think about the silver wrapping paper and the white ribbon and the way I sat there for a moment with my hands on the envelope before I opened it, sensing that something was wrong without yet knowing what. I think about 14 people who knew what was in that box, who had arranged themselves around a table to witness it, who were waiting to see my face. I was supposed to be destroyed by that evening. I think that was genuinely the plan, not even cruelty for cruelty's sake, but a specific, engineered collapse. The defective daughter-in-law quietly removed. Everyone moves on. Owen gets a fresh start. The family line continues. What they didn't plan for was Tamsin, who had been my friend since we were 22 and who understood, without needing to be told, that some envelopes require a response. What they didn't plan for was me, standing up from that table and walking out under my own power, not crying yet, not for another hour, until Tamsin pulled into a gas station parking lot and I finally let myself fall apart in the passenger seat of her Subaru. What they didn't plan for was June. She is asleep right now in the next room. She is wearing a onesie with a small hedgehog on it, and she has her father's ears and my mother's stubbornness. And she has no idea yet that she already changed the entire direction of my life before she was even born. She will know eventually. I'll tell her when she's old enough to understand that some stories start in very dark places and still manage to become something worth keeping. I don't know if that counts as a happy ending, but it is mine. And I chose it, which is more than I could say about most things for a very long time. I keep coming back to the ribbon, the white ribbon on that silver box, the way I pulled it loose without knowing what was inside. There's something about that image that feels like the whole story in miniature. The careful wrapping around something designed to wound, and me, still trusting enough to open it. I don't think my father-in-law was a monster. That's actually the harder truth to sit with. He was a man who had decided what a family was supposed to look like, and he pursued that picture with total conviction and zero conscience about what he flattened in the process. He thought he was being practical. He thought he was protecting his son's future. What he was actually doing was teaching everyone at that table, including his son, that people are only worth keeping if they produce something useful. That's not cruelty in the dramatic sense. It's something quieter and more common and in some ways more dangerous, because it wears the costume of love. What I know now, that I didn't know then, is that the way you treat people when they can't give you what you want is the most honest thing about you. My in-laws treated me like a defective appliance the moment I stopped being useful to their plan. Owen let them. And Tamsin, who had nothing to gain and no role in any of it except the role of being my friend. Tamsin showed up with documentation and a steady hand and the particular kind of intelligence that knows when words aren't enough and evidence is required. I think about that a lot. Real integrity doesn't announce itself. It just does the thing when the thing needs doing. I also think about who I was walking into that dinner versus who I was walking out. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit inside their idea of a daughter-in-law. Agreeing to things I didn't want, staying quiet when I should have spoken, not because I was weak, I want to be clear about that, but because I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was a form of love. It isn't. Keeping the peace at the cost of your own clarity is just a slower way of disappearing. The pregnancy gave me something I hadn't expected, which was an absolutely undeniable reason to stop disappearing. You can negotiate with your own comfort. You cannot negotiate with a child who is coming regardless of whether you've sorted yourself out yet. June made the stakes real in a way nothing else had, and I'm grateful for that, even though the timing was chaotic and the circumstances were a wreck. What I want, if there's anything useful in this story for someone else, is for you to notice who shows up when the box is open and the contents are ugly. Not who was there for the celebrations. Who was there for that? Tamsin was there. Beverly was there every Tuesday morning with her yellow legal pad. My mother called every other day without asking for anything. Those people don't come into your life by accident. You build those relationships through years of showing up honestly, of being the kind of person who is worth showing up for. That's not luck. That's the long, slow work of character, and it pays out in exactly the moments you need it most. I signed those papers eventually. The legal kind, the final kind, the ones Beverly had actually reviewed. I signed them on a Wednesday morning in an office that smelled like old coffee, and I didn't cry, because by then I had already grieved the marriage I thought I had, and what I was signing was just the paperwork catching up to reality. June was 3 months old by then. I drove straight from the attorney's office to pick her up from my mother's, and she was wearing the hedgehog onesie. And she grabbed my finger the way she always does, and I thought, this is the beginning, not the end of something, the beginning of something I actually chose. That's what I couldn't have told you, sitting at that table with the silver ribbon in my hands. That the worst thing they could do to me was also, somehow, the thing that finally set me free.